And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff and you loved it so much you came back for more. Folks, you're brilliant. That was a fantastic move because we have a lot more for you. Now, why do we have more for you? Because this is the podcast that is about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. And you cracked the code. My guest today is a podcaster, amongst other things. This guy's got a resume as long as my arm. So it may take us a few minutes. Sit back and relax while I read all of his qualifications, and we'll get him in here. Folks, this is a place where the rising tide raises all ships and where we come together to support ourselves and each other. Folks, let's get sailing and bring in our guest today. Please welcome to the podcast, doctoral student in psychology, multi-instrumentalist record producer, author, painter, Army veteran, business leader, local government official, and podcaster, host of the podcast From Nowhere to Nothing. Please welcome to the podcast, Joel Bouchard. Joel, how you doing, brother?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, not at all. Thank you for coming on. I honestly, I'm not even sure where to start because I want to hear about all of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, why don't you begin by telling our folks a little bit about who is Joel Bouchard? What are you about? Where do you come from? And what brings you here today, brother?
Yeah, Joel Bouchard is just a guy that likes doing a bunch of different things. If you can't tell, I love, and specifically, I love being somebody who's new at stuff, which is also code for bad at stuff, right? I think that that's just a good way of keeping yourself both humble in life and also playfully childish in some ways. If you're always doing something, there's this temptation that if you get really good at something, to think that you're really good at everything. If you kind of put your identity in one thing, then you're just really good. But if you're always doing something new and you're always screwing up and learning about it and trying to get better, then it just opens your eyes to all of the things that you really don't know. And so you can gain a wide base of experience and you can have a very fun and fulfilling life, but never at any point do you ever feel like you have it figured out. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And that's sort of my experience with podcasting as well.
I love that. I really do. Now, you mentioned something about being a generalist. Is that
Mhm.
what you mean by being a generalist? That you just love a lot of different things? You're not necessarily a master of one of them necessarily, but you just really enjoy them?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I try to organize my life such a way that I'm doing stuff that I like to do. And that's really how I decide how far to take something as well. So um there's some things that I take to the terminal ending, right? I'm working on a PhD in psychology, so that goes a little bit beyond being a generalist, right? If you're getting a PhD, you're kind of a specialized you
A
have some
little bit.
specialized knowledge there. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it's because I find the human mind fascinating, right? And that stems back to my interest in philosophy. Whereas there's other things where I go, okay, well, I'm going to tinker with this for a while and play around with it. And then once I get to a point where I either have the tools to do what I want to do with it, or I reach a level of frustration where I go, this isn't rather than being a roadblock in my learning, I'm running up against something that is, there's diminishing returns on what this is offering versus how hard it is. Then I'll move on to something else. And, I try to keep everything incorporated. I go back to everything and stay in practice, and it becomes harder the more things that you learn, but it also becomes easier in some ways, right? Every time you learn something, you can use it when you learn something new. You have some insight into learning that you didn't know before. So that's what I always tell people is that I'm a generalist, but I think of myself as a master learner. Any new thing that pops up, I like to think that I'm a pretty quick study on it.
Nice. And you're very philosophical about all that too. I understand. I got
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Works out. Works out. All right. So we talked about doctoral student psychology. Before we just breeze over that and blaze past it, why psychology? Because for someone who's a generalist and has all these different avenues, like you mentioned, that is the one that you sort of bore down on, honed in on, and that's the one that has that particular interest to you. Is there something, that makes you just say, hey, psychology is really where I want to focus?
Yeah, kind of two things. One's practical and one is philosophical. The practical aspect of it is that, I'm an Army vet. And so part of the reason I joined the army,
Mm.
it was to get some money for school. I love learning. I love going to school. So I wanted to continue going, but I didn't want a bunch of student loans. Um, and so I've leveraged that, but the problem is I've been going to school for so long that I've outrun how much school the army will pay for. And so then the next avenue is there's certain schools that called yellow ribbon schools that will actually cap tuition for you, as a vet. So it's kind of a, paying tribute to a veteran status. So, um, but they tend to do it for programs that are more, they that tend to have some more practical use. So philosophy, a degree in philosophy is not really one of those options. Not many people see the practical value in it, right? So psychology was as close to philosophy as I could get with a yellow ribbon school. So that's the practical side. But then on the philosophical side, when you look at different topics, I think that psychology is really the science that comes closest to being philosophical in nature, and that's kind of a tricky thing to say because in many ways, all science stems from philosophy and bleeds back into philosophy at the cutting edge, right? So every science started out in some way with philosophical roots. And then at the cutting edge, it devolves back into kind of philosophical hypothesizing where the human thought and has outrun the technological tools that you have. So I think philosophy has a huge part in all science and art, but in psychology specifically, for all the scientific tools we have, fMRI scanners and the scientific method in terms of applying surveys, there's still that element where you go, we have no idea what consciousness is, you know, and so that opens a big door to philosophy. You have a lot more room to sort of maneuver and think about things in an abstract way as opposed to geology, right? Where you go, okay, well, it's literally in stone, so you have some room to imagine maybe 4.4 billion years ago when the Earth was congealing, how the rocks formed. But other than that, it's very scientific. There's not a
Hmm.
whole lot of philosophy in it. So those are kind of the two reasons I chose psychology.
Interesting. All right. I love it. I know I'd get some kind of really good answer out of that too, but wow. All right. I love that there was a practical aspect to that too. It's like, well, the Army's going to pay for this. So I thought that was pretty good. That
Yeah.
works out.
And I mean, I think that's the big thing in life, is that that there's always practical considerations, right? I think that's something that holds people down sometimes is sort of lofty idealism, and that's something that I experience with my music a lot, right? I have a lot of friends who do music as well. Um, but they'll have one or two songs that they've released, or maybe a couple of them haven't released anything, right? They've been working on the same song or the same album for 15 years because it's never good enough,
Right.
And I've never been a perfectionist, right? I've always been somebody who goes, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to go for this, and it's going to be messy and flawed and ugly. But when at least I will have accomplished something, right? And I found that I really like that, because I sort of follow this predictable trend, right? I've done 5 albums and several EPs and numerous singles, so just dozens and dozens of songs. And I always release them, and I'm very excited. And then a year or two later, I'm very upset because I've learned new skills and I think I could have done something better. And then 5 or 6 years later, I'm very happy again because what I realize is that all the flaws and imperfections and things that I didn't know really created a very accurate snapshot of where I was in my musical journey, So that first album that is so ugly and raw and terrible, it actually reminds me very much of who I was as a person at that time, and I'm glad that it's not all glossy and perfect when that's not really where I was at in my career. So I'm a big fan of just doing stuff, just getting it out there and you don't have to apologize for it as long as you don't portray yourself as somebody who knows it all, right? I'm not coming out and saying I'm the best musician ever. If I was, then you're open to criticism. But if people say, "Hey, your album sucks," and you go, "Well, yeah, I know, but I still wanted to do it," then what do they have against you?
I love that. Now, let me see here. Hold on one second. See, this is the best part about not editing. Every time I do this, the guy outside wants to go mow the lawn. So I appreciate you pardoning my pause there for a moment, but it also gave me a chance to wrap my thoughts around the rest of this. So one of the things, that's a great segue because one of the points that you had was multi-instrumentalist record producer. Now, there's, I don't know, roughly five questions that pop right out of that, just that one line right off the bat. As I sit here, folks who are on the video version can see you've got some string instruments behind you. It looks like a cymbal, maybe. You got weights behind you and that type of thing. What instruments do you play? Do you sing also? How does that work?
Yeah, yeah. So I play drums, bass, guitar, and sing primarily. I also play some piano, and then what you see behind me is from top to bottom, a ukulele, a dulcimer, and a mandolin. So tinker on a few different things. Bass, drums, guitar, those are the main instruments. Um, and yeah, I play all kinds of music. Primarily the stuff that I release online is an alternative rock style, but I've done some classical stuff and some jazz stuff, and I'm currently working on like a metal album. I have a progressive album, or well, a progressive thing that I release. It's like a 20-minute long song, sort of a kind of a spacey thing. So kind of like being a little bit all over the map, just for fun, wherever it happens to take me. But those are the main instruments.
Nice, nice. Okay, metal, huh?
Yeah, yeah, that one's tricky, especially to learn after, not doing it before, because there's so many uh with the drums, the footwork is a lot trickier with the hand. The trem picking is a difficult thing to pick up, but I'm having fun learning it. So
All right, I love that. I'm having trouble wrapping my head around metal right now. I mean, you look like you're 18 years old, maybe. You're totally clean cut. I mean, if you had freckles and some apple pie in front of you, I wouldn't know what to think. But metal was not what came to mind, brother.
yeah, yeah, I like I listen to quite a bit of metal actually. And I tend towards the progressive variety. So I like
Wow.
the hour-long songs, that type of thing. But no, some of the more mainstream stuff as well.
All right, we've barely started this interview, and you got a lot of layers going on, man. This is interesting. We're peeling them back. All right, and then record producer. So you're putting your own stuff out. It sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, I put my own stuff out, and I've helped people with other projects as well. Some singer songwriter stuff. I actually did a guy's electronic album last year, which was fun because I've done some electronic stuff myself, but again, it's one of those things that I don't have a lot of practice with. So it's fun to dive in and try to put as you're mixing it, put yourself in a different mindset from what you normally hear.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Nice. Okay. Um, you mentioned that you're an author.
Yes. Yep. I currently have one book out, and that's a fantasy novel, The Sleeper, the Scholar, and the Strix. And I'm working on a uh, analytical philosophical work that should be out by the end of the summer, called A Treatise on Challenges from Nature to Anthropocentric Ontology. So uh, that one's a little bit drier, a little bit, but I think it's fun. I try to use some humor. I try to use some down to earth examples, but basically it addresses how our idea of what it means to be and to exist in reality is sort of biased and tainted by our human perspective. And so I draw on some examples of animals from nature and their behaviors and their functioning in light of or despite not having developed neuronal systems. And, ask some questions about, well, what does it mean to actually be and to experience the world? If this is what philosophers for hundreds of years have said it is, but here are animals in nature that sort of contradict some of those things. So it's short, it's about 50 pages long, and I'm hoping it'll be out in the next month or so. But
Nice. So it's a light read, is what you're saying.
light on time, but it's cognitively demanding. Yeah.
Got it. So is that that sounds like it's in your field, more of a professional type of output.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of a crossover, I suppose. There's definitely I draw heavily on some of my academic academic psychological learning, and then I combine that with some of my layman's philosophical endeavors, and you know, and biology is an interest of mine. I like to incorporate biological examples into philosophy quite a bit because I think that it provides a good counterpoint to a lot of thinking about humanity. I think that some of our mistakes in conceptualizing ourselves as beings is conceptualizing ourselves in isolation from the rest of nature. So I think bringing animals in can kind of answer or at least provide some context to some of those bigger questions that we have.
Nice, nice. Well, I applaud you on that. I mean, all kidding aside, I applaud you on that because, becoming published in your field is a gigantic accomplishment for anybody. So, I wish you all the best on that. When are we expecting that book to come out?
I'm hoping probably about a month from now. I'm hoping. We'll see.
All right, beautiful. All right. So if this takes a few weeks to come out, then it might be about the time this podcast is dropping. So,
Yeah, could be.
all right, could be, could be. If it does, make sure, or even after it does, make sure you get me the link to it. I'll add it to the show notes, even if the episodes come out already. We'll make sure that we put it in there because these are evergreen; they stay up. So then people can
Nice.
find the
Yeah, thanks.
book,
I
right?
appreciate it.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I love that. All right. Now, obviously, you're, Army veteran. We talked about that. What made you, I mean, want to join the service? What was the calling there?
Yeah, I think that, I'd always grown up thinking I was going to join. But my my dad was a pastor, and I got to be 18 and I was all ready to sign up and he said, "Listen," he goes, "as your dad, I think it's an honorable thing you want to do, but I also don't want to see you in harm's way." He goes, "So will you do me this favor?" He goes, "Go to community college. It'll be free. Just do your 2 years. If you still want to go after that, I won't say a thing. I'll let you go." So I did. I went to community college for a couple of years, got an associate's degree in criminal justice. And after that, I didn't go right in. That's when I kind of discovered music a little bit. I formed a band with some friends, and we got pretty well known in the area. We were playing some battles of the bands and doing some different things.
Nice.
And then when that broke up, I said, "Oh, well, now I want to go back to school." And so I still had this urge to serve like I did before. So I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to join. Um, Now I might change my plan a little bit because in the interim I'd gotten married, so I decided I'm not going to go full time. So I went the route of the reserves. So I was an Army reservist. It's a pretty humdrum story. I didn't never went anywhere. I wouldn't say I never did anything. I got 2 medals for in training exercises for a couple different reasons, but it was fun. Met some interesting people, learned some interesting things, and it's been great in terms of the opportunities it's presented me. So
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great story. I think a lot of guys don't understand that that's there, as an option.
mm.
So I love you telling that story. It sounds like it has helped you with your other pursuits too. Like you were saying, the Army's willing to pay for X or Y, and so you can work on the rest of your life then.
Yeah, that's the biggest. A lot of so many people don't take advantage of the educational benefits, and you just go, man, there are kids with tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt that would kill to have that kind of benefit, right?
Right.
And you go, if and it's well deserved. Anybody who's raising their hand to go in, you don't know what you're going to have to go through.
Right.
So if you're making that kind of commitment and you're earning this benefit, you should take advantage of it. You really should.
Yeah.
What do you have to lose, right? It's not like you're anybody else where you're going to be tens or hundreds of $1,000s in debt. It's free money. It's there. Go ahead and learn something, and you never know. It might change your life.
No, I love it. I love the attitude. You're a painter.
Yeah. Yep. So that runs in the family a little bit. My dad was a professional painter, so he started a sign business, and he did all kinds of stuff. The little town that I live in, our mascot is a sea serpent that he designed, so it's all over the town. And it was put into a comic book, and all of the signs in and out are signs that he designed. So yeah, so he was really good. I'm not really good, but I have fun doing it. So yeah, it's something that I do on the side as well.
Nice. Now, business leader and local government official. We're almost up to podcasting here, but
Almost through the list.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't always just go through the list like this with people, but this was fascinating to me because I mean, so many things you named were just so not in relation to the other ones that I was like, I got to hear the story. So I appreciate you humoring me while I'm going through these one at a time. I don't normally. But yeah, business leader. Tell us about that. Is this a business you started or are you running a community group? What's going on there?
Yeah. So when I, let's see. So after I graduated, I went to basic training for the Army, came back. So I was in the reserve. So that's only part time. So was looking around for a job. I live kind of in the middle of nowhere. So not too many options. So there's a local factory and I applied and got hired. And I just started at the bottom. It was rubber injection molding. So they make stuff for mostly for like the power grid. So as you're driving down the road, things you see on top of the utility poles, as well as safety stuff. So respirator masks, head straps, that type of thing. And yeah, just started at the bottom and again was just curious in the whole thing. So every time there was an opportunity to learn a different part, I'd be the guy to volunteer. I'd say, yeah, I want to show me how to do that. Hey, where does this part get used? Hey, what kind of rubber is this? What kind of metal is the mold made out of? Hey, when you adjust the inject time, what happens here? Hey, when you adjust this. And so if you're curious like that, right, and you're showing some interest, before you know it, you become the second shift supervisor, then you become the planner, and then you become the production manager. So that's where I'm at now, is the production manager of the factory. I really enjoy it. It's I think it's the perfect mix of physical and uh, psychological and social challenge. You're dealing with people issues day in and day out, issues with the machines and scheduling and vendors, and as well as getting to walk around. Not being stuck in an office, but being able to drive a forklift and go outside and do stuff. So it's not glamorous, not prestigious, but that's not something I ever really cared about. It's all about, like I said at the beginning, doing stuff that you want to do, right? Doing stuff that just doesn't make you miserable. It's like if you're going to do this for a third of your life, you might as well find something that you like to do. And I really like to do it. It's a lot of fun. So,
Nice. Wonderful. I love your attitude about everything, so far. So I appreciate you bringing that on and doing that. Local government official. So you're serving in some capacity.
yeah. So this is a funny one because my podcast got me this gig.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
yeah. So the village that I live in, um, they had um, the way the government structure breaks down. There's a mayor, and then there's four trustees that are on a board, and so they kind of oversee the administration of the village, and Department of Public Works, the police, the fire, everything, the Parks Committee, everything else. So they a couple of years ago, somehow the mayor had found my podcast, and so he started listening. And so every once in a while, I'd see him around town, and I hadn't met him before, but my sister babysat for them when they were younger, so he knew me somehow. And he mentioned, "Oh, hey, I listen to your podcast. I like it." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then last year, they had one of the trustees step down, and so they had an open position. And he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, we got an open board position." He's like, "I've listened to your podcast. You're obviously somebody who thinks very deeply about things, somebody who has a lot of perspective, a lot of a good attitude. I think you'd be a good I think you'd be a good fit for it." So trustee is normally an elected position, but if they have somebody step down in the middle of a cycle, he can appoint somebody. So I got appointed, and then my term expired last year, and I ran for election, and I did get elected. So, yeah, so I'm a trustee for the village that I live in, and currently I oversee the public safety, so the police and fire, as well as the parks committee. So we're the tree board, and the village parks, the beach, that type of thing. So
Nice. Well, congratulations on winning the election. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
All
thanks.
right. So I mean, you've got all kinds of fantastic things happening in your life, and on top of it all, the cherry on top, okay, is the podcast. So here we go. The podcast that got you the job. Um, what made you after all this stuff, with all this other stuff going on in your life, and all these other interests, what made you say, you know what else I want to do? I want to have a podcast, and I want to talk about like philosophy and psychology, and ask questions like what does identity mean? On one of your
Yeah, yeah,
episodes, and why are pets important to people? I mean, I really enjoyed your episodes, but I was like, man, this is unique. What makes you want to
yeah,
do that?
yeah. It's really funny. Um, in some ways of a marriage of convenience because I so when I was getting my associate's degree at community college, I took a philosophy class. Didn't really know what it was, something about guys with big beards and dusty books that are mad at the world, whatever. I took the class and it wasn't like that at all, right? The professor was just this dynamic guy that, encouraged the whole class to discuss and debate things and think about stuff. And he'd come in wearing superhero shirts and would always was always relating, these, dusty old philosophers like Socrates to, the X-Men and whatnot. And I go, man, it was so cool. Um, so then I got that, got my associate's degree and I went on with my life and I built my recording studio. I built it all from scratch, right? I never had a professional instrument lesson. So I taught myself all the instruments. I taught myself how to build a computer and, did all the stuff. And then I looked around, I go, hey, you know what? Like I could do a podcast. Like there's nothing that's stopping me. I I have all the tools. So really the thought occurred to me to do a podcast before I even knew what I was going to do it on. I just go, oh, I have all the tools so I could do it. And I like doing new things. So why not try it? And I go, well, what would I do it on? And I thought back to that time in community college and I go, you know what? That was like, those were the best conversations I ever had in my life, and it's almost like I try to tell people it's, I think that that's part of the appeal of podcasting today is that it's like a callback to conversations before the internet existed. Like um
Wow.
I know you said I was you thought I was 18. I'm almost 37. So I remember before the internet was invented, right? And me and my friends, just being out at 2 a.m. after work, laying on the hoods of our cars, looking up at the sky and going, hey, you think God exists? you know, like people don't really do that anymore. The face-to-face conversations, I don't think are quite what they used to be, especially for the younger generation. So I think a lot
Yeah.
of them tune into podcasts to hear people have deep conversations, and that's their way of engaging in them rather than not having them in real life. So that was kind of the same impetus for me. I go, man, I really miss having those discussions in that philosophy class. So 10 years after I took the class, haven't talked to the guy, uh, just got a hold of him and said, hey, you want to do a podcast on philosophy? And luckily he said yes and didn't think I was a giant weirdo. And so we started out, we thought we were just going to do kind of a limited series, 10 of the biggest topics. And sure enough, we got through the first 10 and we go, there's way more stuff we can talk about. So let's just keep going. But yeah, the layout of the show is essentially every episode we take just one or two words, right? Just one or two words, and we spend a whole hour talking about them. And we like to sort of split the show up into thirds. It's very conversational, so it doesn't always follow this pattern, but we try to follow the pattern of, spending the first third talking about the history of the word, both, where the word came from, what philosophers in the past have said about it, that type of thing. And then we'll spend the middle part of the episode taking that background and discussing it in terms of our experience with it, and kind of hashing out some details and talking about some things. Then we like to spend the last third of the episode kind of asking some speculative questions about, based off of what history said, based off of what we've discussed and how we've sort of played around with the topic. What does it mean for humanity, right? What does it mean for us as a whole? What are some questions about it? So, but the premise is, essentially that everything is philosophical and that everybody's a philosopher, right? So we don't shy away from anything, right? We'll talk about God and time, but we'll also talk about pets and Disney's princesses, like any of those things, right? That's the whole point is that, philosophy is the world's worst marketer. Like me going into community college, nobody knows what it's about. They just know it's boring and they don't want to talk about it. But nothing could be further from the truth, right?
Yeah.
Anybody who has thought about something enough that can give you a detailed response, they're philosophical, right? And everybody has one of those things where their collection or their hobby or whatever it is, where they go, this is so much more complicated than anybody else knows about or cares about, right? And
Right.
so that I think that's the important thing is sort of demonstrating to people that everything is that way and everybody has the ability to think that way. And if that is your approach, then life is like this really cool, exciting thing. Everywhere you look, there's stuff that is worthy of investigation.
I love that. There's an old saying from the 70s, actually, that says the unexamined life is not worth living.
Hmm.
And that's something that applies to philosophy, a lot back when I was studying it, back in the days. I think that Socrates might have been one of my original teachers, to be honest with you. I'm pretty sure he was in the classroom. But I I love the way that you categorized it. It wasn't just a bunch of, dusty old guys with long beards, and that's what people think of it. It seems to me like philosophy is absolutely a lost art, in terms of what's out there today. Um, no, everybody just even texting, is like, okay, hey, are you coming home? Yes. It's like everything's got to be short, concise, sweet, efficient, to the point. And if you wax on or get eloquent about anything, or, God forbid, think about something for a moment, then it's almost an inconvenience to everybody else that
Hmm.
you're around. So you have to have kind of a friendly confine to be able to do that. And it seems like your podcast, there's a point to my rambling. It seems like your podcast provides that safe space for people to stop for a minute and think a little bit without having to just spit back out a quick answer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the thing is that especially over the past 30 years, we've been more and more oriented towards this go, go, go thing. And I realize that like I am the pot calling the kettle black. Like I go harder than anybody else, right? I'm always going. But there's a difference between going in a way that is self-reflective, metacognitive, critically thought about, and just going, 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 and not realizing why or what you've been doing. And so you're absolutely right. Communications become very much about efficiency, and people sort of get antsy and impatient if it's anything else. Uh, but most people realize, if you can find that topic that they enjoy, and you can sort of dig into it, and you can ask some questions and let them sort of talk, that sort of antsy anxiety kind of melts away, and they go, "Oh wait, I just want to live in this space forever. Like I don't want to do anything but have this conversation now." And again, it's that's the sort of the point of our show is just broadening people's horizons to the fact that it's not just your one hobby or your collection or your interest. The whole world is like this. So if you give us a chance, and sometimes it takes us 15 or 20 minutes to fully explain a concept, but if you can just stick with it that long, you can really get some interesting places.
No, I love that. When I listened to, and I mentioned this to you in the pre-interview, when I listened to your episode about identity, I mean, you guys started off talking about Avengers 1, where, Iron Man was fighting Thor type of thing.
Yeah.
And I had to do a double take. I'm like, am I on the right podcast? Did I do this right? Did I click the wrong button? But after a couple of minutes, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I think I see where they're going. And then you guys connected all the dots. And so that is how your podcast runs. It was really cool. This is normal for you
Yeah.
guys then.
Yeah. And that's the thing is before I started the podcast, I do listen to a lot of podcasts, especially at that time. At that time at my job, I was just a molder. And so I would spend 8 hours a day just listening to podcasts as I was making parts. And most of them were philosophy podcasts. And most of them were um, intellectually satisfying, but otherwise aesthetically unpleasing, is I guess the nicest way I can put it, right? Where, yeah, here's a guy and he reads an excerpt out of Aristotle's thing word for word, and then, it's over 2 minutes later, or you have some guys that are talking at so high of a level, you can just picture just how stuffed their chairs are and, how full the libraries are. And it's like, if, I forget who said it, but somebody said that, the sort of the mark of a smart person is the fact that they can convey an idea to somebody in the simplest terms. And I think that that's true. So many people with philosophy podcasts get caught up in their own sort of eloquence or, their own verbosity. And it's like, no, just just bring it down to earth so that you can engage people, and you can have a conversation with them. And most importantly, is that we're not out here trying to give answers to people, right? We're just examining questions and talking about it in such a way so that when the episode's over, you can go and think about it on your own and hopefully have conversations about it on your own with other people and come to your own conclusions. And I think that that's really what philosophy is supposed to be about.
Nice. I love it. Absolutely love it. Well, I do love what you guys are doing, and you've been doing it for a while. I mean, you had quite a few episodes on there. How long have you been doing it? How many episodes you got?
Since December 2018. So we'll be going on 7 years here. And
Nice.
I couldn't tell you how many episodes we have. I think we're in like the 230, 240 range, something like that. Um, I don't really pay attention. As a matter of fact, I do a lot of guest appearances. Mostly because I just like having good conversations like this. And there was one a couple weeks ago where before we started recording, the lady said, "Oh, congratulations on being in the top 5% of podcasts in the world." I go, "I had no idea." I go, I don't really follow I don't follow the stats. Once in a while I'll log in just to see. But more than like the overall numbers, what I like to see is like the map. And so to see the map where you go, oh man, basically everywhere in the world other than like Central Africa has heard the podcast. You go, oh, that just blows your mind, right? That technology allows you to reach that many people. But yeah, I think it's like 230 episodes somewhere around there.
Yeah, I wasn't going to count them, but I knew you were over 200. I could just tell by, the flip, of the
Yeah.
screen. I'm like, okay, they're well over 200. I get it.
Yeah.
You get a feel for that after a
Yeah.
little while. But all right, so you've been doing it that long. I'm guessing that you've monetized the podcast in some fashion.
No, not at all. Nope. We haven't and we won't. We I don't even edit it really. We like to show the listeners what a philosophical conversation looks like, right? And so as a result, we don't interrupt it with ads. If I stumble over my words or Norm contradicts himself or we sit there in silence for a couple seconds, all of that stays in. And again, this goes back to the other philosophy podcast, right? Where you got these guys reading off of a script, 5 syllable words, you go, that really discourages people from getting involved. And so if you see us sitting down, okay, well, here's a guy who's a doctoral student in psychology, and here's a guy who's a professor of philosophy, and they make mistakes, then everybody's going to make mistakes, and that's okay. That's the process of philosophy is talking about the stuff, realizing you were wrong, rethinking your position, putting it out again, realizing it was wrong again, rethinking it again, right? It's this constant sort of reformulation and refinement of a position. And in the end, like we said, you probably won't even get to a firm position or a firm answer, but at least you'll get somewhere where now you can continue to think about it in such a way that lends more perspective to other things.
So over 200 episodes, top 5% podcast, and no interest in making any money on it at all. You're doing it purely for enjoyment.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. Love it. If I could applaud and not destroy the audio, I would do that for you right now. I love that. I love that passion for something that you want to do and you just do it to that degree. Well done, man.
Yeah, and
Love that.
that's usually my advice to podcasters who are starting out, and sometimes you hear them and they go, I want to do this for a living or I want to make some money or something. I go, there's nothing wrong with that. Like I don't if people want to make money, that's totally fine. I said, but you can't start there, right? You have to start with a passion for whatever it is you're talking about. And if you're passionate about it and you're good enough at it that, it makes sense, eventually people will follow you. But it's going to take time, and that's why the majority of podcasts don't make it 10 episodes is because people get to 7, 8, 9 episodes. They go, oh, my followers aren't going up. I'm not making any money. Forget about it. And at that point, I'm like, well, were you ever really dedicated to your topic to begin with? Right.
Right.
If you don't even care about it enough to get on here and talk about it for free for an hour a week or whatever, how much did you really care? So just stick
Yeah.
it out. Just stick it out. I don't think we saw, a whole lot of traction until maybe 2.5 years in. And then at some point, like I said, the map just exploded. It was being heard all over the world and the numbers were pretty good. So, but yeah, on our side, you know, Norm's retired. I make pretty good money at a day job that I enjoy doing. I don't have any desire to leave it. I have a bunch of other endeavors that do pretty well. So yeah, we just do it for the love of philosophy.
Beautiful. That's great. All right. So while you're doing this, how do you go about promoting the podcast? I mean, it's doing quite well. So you're doing something right.
The only promotion I've ever done is coming on other people's podcasts and talking about it.
Nice.
So
You're
that's
killing people
that's one
right
of the
now.
main reasons I like doing guest interviews. I think that I've done uh yeah, I think I've done over 40 guest interviews. Um and the number one reason is to have good conversations, but my ulterior motive as well is to promote the podcast, because usually if somebody accepts me as a guest, we get into some deep philosophical conversations where I can refer back to my podcast, right, and bring up things that we've talked about and hopefully get people interested in it so that they come to listen, not to make me money as we've talked about, but just because I want people to have these. And we say conversations. It's really a listening experience. But in my mind, if you're listening to my podcast, you're engaging in the conversation because you have to be thinking hard about whatever it is that we're talking about, right? So
Right.
you're doing that thinking on your own. So yeah, that's the only way we've ever promoted it, though.
Nice. And like I said, you're just killing people right now because everybody's like, I have to do this and I have to do this. And I'm like, not necessarily. Not if you do one thing really, really well, you don't. But no, that's fantastic. I love it. And you're a great guest. I mean, you're well spoken. You're really happy. You come across fantastic. You know what I mean? So I can see why somebody would have you on and then people want to go listen to your show. So hopefully that happens for you here. And, we continue to help your growth with the Podcaster Nation, in your corner. But I got to know from nowhere to nothing. Now, granted, that sounds very philosophical, but by the same token, there has to be a story behind that.
So it's a quote. It's a quote from Ambrose Bierce about the full quote is, "Philosophy is a road from nowhere to nothing." And I always loved that one because it's kind of tongue in cheek. Like, it's really not saying something particularly nice about philosophy, but it's saying something true, right? And well, as most things in life, sometimes the truth is ugly, right? But it's only ugly from a certain perspective. And that's what philosophy is, right? A lot of these topics that are highly philosophical, they tend to push people away because they're overwhelming, right? To think about, is there a God, or you know, are we alone in the universe, or what happened before the Big Bang, right? It's not hard to fall into an existential spiral thinking about those things if you're obsessed with answers. But if you're obsessed with questions, then it's really one of the most fun things you can possibly do. So, to me, I love the fact that we live in a reality that's so much stranger than any fiction that we could ever write. And I love just the journey of exploring the questions. Um, and then I totally lost the thread of what you had asked, but I remember it now. It was from nowhere to nothing. So
Right. The
that's the
name, yeah.
perfect encapsulation of not only the philosophical journey, but the show in particular, right? We start from nowhere, and we start from nothing and we end up going nowhere, I guess.
Nice. Yeah. And it's okay if you get lost in between Nora and nothing. It's really fine. I get
Yeah. Yeah.
it. Right.
Pretty much where you started.
That's right. I love. Okay, well, I appreciate that. I had never heard that expression. I'm not, of course, a philosopher or anything, but I took philosophy in college. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Loved engaging with it. Loved having those conversations. Like all day long, just going back and forth about the ifs and the hows and the what ifs. Um, that doesn't seem like something that goes on very often. So as you kind of travel through your life, and you mentioned, real life is entertaining, to say the least. Um, do you find that it's difficult to have a deep philosophical conversation with people because, for one reason or another, or are people really willing to just engage in that and maybe they don't have another place to go do it?
I think it's highly context dependent from my point of view, because it always strikes people as interesting when they've only heard you on a podcast, but like, I'm a huge introvert. maybe you captured that on the pre-show talk. You mentioned that a couple times. You're like, "Oh, I'm doing most of the talking. A lot of one-word answers, right?" It's kind of how I am in real life, right? Like my wife and my friends joke about it actually because they're all really extroverted and they say, well, introverts don't really make friends. They just get adopted by extroverts. So I'm always that guy in social situations that's sitting in the corner and you have to be so crazy extroverted that you look at this guy that looks like he wants to be left alone and then go up and talk to him and get one word answers for 20 minutes and stay engaged until he finally, breaks open. So I tend to be a little bit laid back. And so there wasn't a whole lot, but now that people sort of know about the show, a lot of people listen to the show, they can kind of identify me. A lot of people approach me and want to talk about philosophical conversations.
Uh,
So it depends on the situation. If people are tight for time, right? If I'm going into a convenience store to pay for a bag of chips or something, you know, that's usually not the time to say, hey, do you think money's real? Because most people are like, yeah, I'm just getting my gas and leaving. But if you ever have people in a spot where they're burning some time, the most recently I was at a birthday party and, there's a whole bunch of people around. Not all of them know each other. So, there's just different pockets of people. And one of them, a few of them knew about my podcast and stuff. So they came up and started talking to me and pretty soon there's a crowd of people and I think it was like 6 hours that we talked about all kinds of different stuff, ranging from religion to metaphysics to the subject of my book that's coming out, kind of the animal kingdom and that sort of thing. So I think people want to have the conversations. I think they really do. I think that the time constraints that are both actually and artificially imposed on us by the modern world sort of restrict us from engaging in it more than we do. But I think people deep down do want to have them.
Interesting. So do you have people coming up to you on the street and saying, hey, Joel, what's the meaning of life?
Yeah. Yeah, I get that one a lot. And it's less satisfying, but it's more obvious than a lot of people think, right? The meaning of life has to be subjective, right? You have to make it. Um, there really isn't any overarching meaning because each one of us has a different brain that developed in a different way and views reality from a different perspective. So, for instance, if I take the existential philosopher Albert Camus, he was an absurdist. So he thought that life was just absurd. There's no point to it. It's meaningless. And as a matter of fact, he said that if we were all brave enough, we'd just kill ourselves because there's nothing but suffering, right? I don't know if you can
Ouch.
tell by talking to me, but that's not my experience of the world at all.
No, I
And
don't
so,
get that.
yeah, yeah. So my meaning and his meaning are two different things, and I think that's really the only way you can look at it. If you're looking at this overarching meaning, right? Well, why does life exist? Why do humans exist? Why does the universe exist? I think in some ways those kind of are absurd questions, right? How could you possibly answer them? They lie outside the realm of science. And without science, which is an empirical endeavor, you'll never be able to answer a question, right? You can still apply philosophy. We can still talk about it in abstract um, terms, and we can apply logical rules and that sort of things, but we can never come to an answer. So as far as things that we can actually answer, right? I think that we have to just admit that the meaning of life is a subjective phenomenon. It is what you make it.
Nice. Nice. I feel like I'm watching Kung Fu Panda right now. There is no secret ingredient, man.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Okay, great. All right, I got to ask my corny question right now. As in terms of doing your podcast, what is it about doing your podcast that you just absolutely love the most? What is it about doing your podcast that you just absolutely hate the most?
Hmm. Oh man, that's rough because I really love almost all of it. I'm trying to think of man, I think that if I had to say I could not tell you what I hate about it. I really there's not a single thing that I did. Well, okay, I can think of something. I think it's the ending. It's the ending of the podcast, right? Because I have this the intro, I write like a little intro at the beginning. And
Sure.
so that gives me a chance to sort of be clever and kind of think about some things and sort of ease listeners into the topic. And at the end, I have this, sort of catchphrase, hey, until next time, keep pondering. But to get to that catchphrase, I'm always trying to think of a way to wrap up. And I just always end up saying something like, yeah, this was a lot of fun because it was. It's not like I'm being dishonest, but like I just can't get away from that phrase. I'm like, I need some more adjectives. I need I need some other way of expressing that I had a good time. So I always get to the end and I'm always trying to think of like what should I say between now and from until next time, keep pondering. So that's my least favorite part, I guess, would be the self-imposed stress of trying to segue into the end of the episode. Um,
That's
as
great.
far as what I love, I like I said, I really love the whole thing. It's a labor of love. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. Right? I'm not getting paid. Nothing like that. So, but I think that it probably is the. I mean, it's the monologue. Because that's sort of giving me a chance to like think through it, rather than reacting in the moment. But the conversation itself is obviously the star of the show. Some people do solo podcasts, and I just don't know how they do it. There's no way I could sit here and talk about something for 2 minutes, much less an hour. Whether I couldn't write a script, I couldn't talk off the cuff, I just couldn't do it. So having that person to talk to bounce ideas off of, to engage with, that's really where it's at for me. I salute all the people that do solo podcasts, but I just have no idea how.
Wow. All right. Yeah, mine's a mix, so yeah, I mean, I do some solo and I do interviews like this, but I mean, I love the solo ones. It's just, me talking about my opinion or whatever the topic is, and I'm just talking to the camera, and you really don't
So you
like
just have
that,
like
huh?
bullet points that you go by, or how do you do it?
I do it like this. You know what I mean? I've been doing it for so long, like you have, that it's just a conversation. But instead of having a conversation with somebody, I just have the conversation with someone who's not really there, but as if they are.
Huh.
So yeah, it's interesting. So the thing
Yeah,
you
I
yeah.
do not think I could do it.
Oh man. Well, you know what? I want to challenge you to try one because
Okay.
I mean, you've got the personality. I mean, you got this energy. I bet you could do it. I
The
bet you could do
closest I came was so you and I connected on Podmatch.
it. Hmm.
The guy who runs Podmatch has his own podcast that
Hmm.
you can get onto through Podmatch.
Right.
And so I did get onto that. And so that was one where he goes, you have to create a 10 to 12-minute video, and it's just you talking about a topic.
Right.
And so I was able to pull that one off, and I made it onto his show, but it was rough. It was I put more preparation into that 12 minutes than I have into 200-hour long episodes. No doubt. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, Alex is great. I had him on as a guest on one of my other podcasts
Oh,
already.
yeah.
So yeah,
Nice.
it's he's a great guest too. So he's a lot like you, just
Yeah.
all smiles, full of
He's a great
energy.
guy. Yeah.
That's
He's a
great.
great guy. I really like him.
I love it, man. Thank you for all of this and everything that you've shared with everybody. Normally, I would hit my last question. Do you have time for maybe just two
Yeah.
questions left? Okay,
Sure.
because I've kept you a long time, and I appreciate that very much. Very interesting stuff going on in your life, and I appreciate you sharing with everybody. But before I get to my last question, I am curious. I would never ask anybody like what's your favorite, type of thing because you have 200 and something episodes. But what is one topic or exchange or, ponderance that you've had on the show that just like really stands out to you? Kind of like the first one that pops in your mind or the one that brings you the biggest smile, something like that. Maybe share that with everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So, of course, by nature, I'm just interested in everything. I love every episode we do, I get so excited about. But, you know, some of them you hop from thing to thing, and then some of them stick with you throughout time. And that's the one that sticks with me is time. Time is so weird, when you start to think about how it's relative, and how it stretches and shrinks, and it had a starting point, and will it have an ending point, and is it cyclic, and is it actually tied into space? Is space time an actual thing? Because some physicists are saying that the space time paradigm might not actually exist, and there might be a simulation underlying it, which, the James Webb Space Telescope is starting to show, but some of its data earlier on, that it's possible the universe was born as the white hole from a black hole in a different universe, right? And so now you have all of the information from a 3D universe can be imprinted on a 2D surface without losing any information. And also all these things start spinning around as you investigate time and what is now. How much is now? Is it a second? Is it a picosecond? Is it a Planck length? Is it a minute? You know, is there any such thing as now? Because there's some postulations that our entire conception of past, present, and future is completely made up in the human mind to organize the reality that we're engaged in, and it doesn't actually exist out there. And then there's some physics that says that the arrow of time does exist, but it can't. There's no reason why it goes from past to present or past to future instead of future to past. So just so many paradoxes and mysteries and intriguing possibilities that time is you can never exhaust it. It's so much fun to investigate.
My goodness. I think the closest I ever got to that was talking to my son about Flash and like going back in time and things like that, on his show.
Yeah.
And we would sit there and go, well, now if you go back in time, but then you change this, then what happens in the future? And we would actually sit there and have those, conversations. So I think that's as close as I ever got to a philosophical conversation about time. But what you're talking about right there sounds like you literally could just go on pondering it back and forth and so on forever because there's really no right or
Yeah.
wrong
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah. No, it's another one of those things that, there's no real empirical way of measuring it. There's clocks, but clocks are a human invention. We invented clocks to measure time. But really, I mean, if you take that clock here on Earth or you put the clock out in outer space and send it going at a million miles an hour, now they don't even tick at the same rate because they're experiencing time differently. And so, yeah, we don't even, it's one of those things where I feel like we talk about it so confidently when we really just don't have the first idea of what it actually is. So that's why I love it.
Awesome. I knew we were going to get a great answer to that one. So that's a conversation that could keep on going for a very long time. I love it. All right. Final question. And I really appreciate you for sure. Everything you've shared today, Joel. You've given a lot of advice to folks throughout this episode. So I'm going to pin you down a little. You can either double down on what you've already said or, throw out a new thing. But you've been doing this for more than a minute. So, I mean, as far as our acceptable time space continuum allows for. But you've been doing this for a while. So, what is your best piece of advice to podcasters who are out there who are not quite where you are at this point in their careers?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's easy, and that's have me as your first guest. Um, I'm only partially joking because I am tomorrow. I'm going to be on a show that I was the first guest on and was able to offer her some advice. And then next Friday, I'm going to be the first guest on another person's show. So I love offering advice. I love helping people out. I love giving them tips to get them started because I always want to see people get their message out there and not worry about all the other stuff, and then from that point on, you could decide how far you want to go with it. I never want the technical side of it to be a hindrance to people. And so I can offer two really potent pieces of advice that if you're a podcaster starting out, you can get professional stuff right away, right? This studio, this microphone, you don't need it. You don't need it anymore. That's all stuff that would have been great 10, 15 years ago. Technology's made it obsolete, right? Two things. One is you want a recording platform that does local recording. So I like to use Riverside. And what that does is if you use one of those platforms, the audio records on your computer and it records on your guest computer. So if there's an interruption in the connection, you don't lose the whole podcast. It continues on and they match up perfectly and everything goes off without a hitch. I like Riverside to use. You can pay to have it extended if you want, but real easy to use, real high quality, and they give you download or render your recording. Second piece of advice is, if you're not a professional in compression and that type of stuff, if you don't, there's a website, Auphonic, Phonic, and it's a artificial intelligence mixing platform specifically for dialogue. And so all you do is you go in and it gives you a few different options. So you can kind of customize the way it comes out, but it doesn't really matter. Like you don't need to think about it overly much, right? You just look at just go with the basic recommendations that they have. You upload it. It will remove all of the background noise out of your audio. It will EQ it. It will compress it and level it, and it will sound production ready. And that's it. You're done. You're done. It doesn't matter. I've recorded on a phone before and put it up there, and it sounds fantastic. I've recorded in very noisy environments. I've recorded with a bad mic cable before that was buzzing the whole time. It takes it all out and leaves the voice there. I like to give the technical advice, right? Because on the show stuff, that stuff will all work itself out. I listened back to my first couple episodes, they're trash, right? But I was passionate about what I was talking about. So it works itself out with time. The technical stuff, that's more where people, they worry about not presenting their best face to the public. So I always like to give that technical advice, right? Get a recording platform that's easy to use and that, provides you with some security in terms of how well your recording turns out. And then use an automated mixing software that does all that hard audio engineering stuff for you. And Auphonic is just great. And, that they give you a free 2 hours a month as well. So try it out. And I guarantee you'll like it. But if for some reason you don't, it's free. It and Riverside are both free to try. And right off the bat, you can get a really nice quality podcast.
Nice. Nice. I appreciate that. That's great advice. Great advice for people, especially folks who are starting out and are not quite where you are. So appreciate you bringing that. Joel, you've been absolutely amazing today. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and learning all about you, and just talking philosophy and psychology and everything else with you today. It's been just a ton of fun. So thank you for coming on the show. I'm not going to read all this again. We're just going to simply say the host of From Nowhere to Nothing and a lot of other stuff. Joel Bouchard, thank you very much for coming on, brother. And we're looking for your book. So I'm looking forward to that coming out.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun talking, and I'll for sure make sure you get a link.
Okay. Thank you so much. Looking forward to that. Folks, this has been another absolutely fantastic episode of The Podcaster Nation. Folks, this is the podcast that's about podcasters. It's for podcasters. It's done by podcasters. And as we showed again today, this is the place where the rising tide truly raises all ships. So keep sailing.